Hi everybody, it's Maria here, and today I'm going to be sharing a really fun faux watercolor technique. I'm going to be using it with two different background stamps, the circular grid bold prints and the water ripple bold prints, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to do and what an impact it can make. For this technique, you will need a stamp positioner, so I've got my circular grid bold prints already in my MISTI, and now I'm putting a piece of watercolor cardstock face down on my stamp. I'm going to add a couple strips of adhesive and then close my MISTI on it so that I can adhere my cardstock in place. I want to make sure that it won't move because I will be stamping multiple times. Now I'm starting with my Lemon Drop Reactive ink, and I'm starting with my lightest color ink and then giving a light spritz of water and stamping onto my watercolor paper. It's important not to use too much water during this process, otherwise you will lose the detail from your stamp. After cleaning my stamp, I re-inked with Creamsicle ink, lightly spritzed and stamped again. Now I'm going back in with my third color, which is Fruit Punch, and I'm just making sure to hit the edges where I didn't have very much color yet on my background piece. This background is done, and now we are going to repeat the same process. I'm applying another piece of watercolor cardstock to the inside of my MISTI, and this time I'm going to make sure that my stamp is all the way clean, so I'm using some of the Hero Arts Ultra Clean Stamp Cleaner to do that. When doing this technique, I like to start with my lightest ink color and then move on with my darker colors. So I've just used Key Lime Fizz, lightly spritzed it, and stamped it down once. I had a little bit of excess water pooling on my background piece, so I picked that up with a paper towel. Now I'm stamping in Pool Party ink and applying a light layer and just picking up any extra puddles of water so that I don't lose the definition of the stamp on my background. Now I'm moving on to my darkest color of ink, which is Blue Raspberry. When I applied this, I accidentally pressed the edge of the ink pad into my stamp, which left me with some solid lines. So I just dabbed those lines out with a towel before stamping, and I ended up with a very smooth transition of color. Now I'm going to show you something that I'm pretty excited about. I have some black watercolor cardstock and I wanted to try this technique on black, and I realized that I probably needed to have some kind of a base coat to make the color pop. So I grabbed my Unicorn White Pigment ink from Hero Arts, and first I'm going to apply a base coat with that white pigment ink. So I'm just getting an even coating on my background stamp, and then I'm going to stamp that onto the watercolor cardstock. Before moving on to stamping my other colors, it's going to be really important that I clean this ink off of my stamp. If I apply reactive ink on top of this and get this on my ink pad, it could contaminate my reactive ink pad. So I'm just making sure I get most of that off. And now I'm going to go in with my Splash Reactive ink and apply a lot of that, and I'm hoping that it's just going to pop right off of that white when I stamp it. So up close you can definitely see it, but it looks more like a pale blue and less like the vibrant blue that Splash looks like on white cardstock. So now I'm going to go in with my Blue Hawaii ink, and I'm going to stamp that right on top of that white ink and on top of the Splash, and then I'm going to go in with Purple Galaxy, lightly spritz that, and do the same exact process. Okay, so we're really starting to be able to see those colors come through now, and I thought that it would be fun to add one more color to the mix, so I went ahead and grabbed my Taffy ink, which is just a really beautiful pink color, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp that after spritzing it lightly with water. Now you don't want to stick your fingers right in your wet background, so I used my poking tool to help me pick it back up, and look at that, it almost reminds me of abalone. Got lots of pretty colors. Now I am going to do the same technique with the water ripples background, and the reason why I wanted to do it with this background is because this design has a larger surface area, and so it's going to be a little bit more forgiving, and if you use a little bit more water you're not going to lose the detail, but you're going to have the water move around more in the design. So I started with Splash, spritzed it with water, stamped, moved on to Blue Hawaii, spritzed it with water, stamped, and now I'm going to go ahead and go in with that Purple Galaxy, which is the newest purple in this reactive ink line. I'm spritzing it and stamping again, and I just love the way these colors are starting to pool together. I did want to make sure that I didn't lose any of the definition from my stamped image, so I picked up the extra water, and now I'm going back in with Splash to add in a little bit more blue because I wanted to have more than I did. Okay, so now let's take a look at that finished background. Oh, and I'm going to leave those little bits of water that are pooling. I'm going to let it dry like that. I think it's really pretty. Now I'm going to go ahead and do this technique again on the black watercolor paper. So we have to start with that base coat of the unicorn white, and I'm adding that and making sure that I just have enough to give me a base coat. Now I've cleaned off my stamp, and I'm using Splash Reactive ink again, and then I'm spritzing and stamping. And just so you guys know, off camera, I am cleaning my stamp between every single layer. You don't have to clean it perfectly when you're going from lightest ink color to darkest ink color, but especially with that unicorn ink, you really do need to make sure you're cleaning your stamp. Okay, so after the splash, now I'm going back in with Blue Hawaii, and my third color for this background is going to be Taffy, and I think that pink is just going to pop right off the top of those blues. So I've inked up my stamp, spritzed it lightly, and I'm laying the color down, and holy smokes, if that isn't my favorite background of the bunch. I just love the way this one looks. Now, as the colors dry, they will fade back a little bit, but this is still pretty cool. Now let's take a look at how I finished these cards off. I really wanted to let the backgrounds be the star of the show, so I kept it simple by using die cuts from the Happy Thanks Stampin' Cut XL, Big Hug Stampin' Cut, Love You Stampin' Cut, and Hello There Stampin' Cut. But if you want to, you can also use these backgrounds to create a scene and build something out in front of it. So that's what I did on this card. So here's the card that I made with that last background that we made. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Sending big hugs and lots of love to everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.